at the beginning of COVID, we as a business, a training business, suddenly had no ability to be physically training people, and we had time on our hands. And we thought one wonderful thing to do would be to do a boost podcast that inspired and motivated people. And one of my first guests on the very first podcast was Bep, because I wanted her to share a story about resilience, her own personal story about resilience. And it was simply inspiring. And she had an issue with her family. A member of her family was very, very ill, and she nursed him through that. And towards the end of his illness, she became very ill herself. And so a more inspiring person, I frankly, I don't know. So Bep, I'd love you to talk to us about kindness, please.
I'd love to. Thank you, Mark, and thank you for having me, everybody. So my name is Bep. I run a business called Thrive 365, having had a 20-year corporate career selling chocolate for Mars for a living. I then decided that there came a point in my life, I suppose, where a lot was questioned, a lot about who I was, what I wanted to be known for in the world, actually. So not just within my corporate setting, but on a bigger scale. And it led me on, I suppose, my own path of self-awareness, of understanding, of actually breaking down, actually pushing myself out of the boundary that I have found myself in, working in a corporate job for so long. And I wanted to know me that little bit better. So, and I had some personal experiences, I've had my own cancer journey. And it just made me question life in a whole different way. So much so that I suppose that's where the business idea came from, in terms of thinking about creating those and sometimes these challenges that come completely left field knock us for six, and we really question who we are as a result of the experience, and who we are as we've come through the storm that we may have been through. And that can be a number of different things. The one common denominator, I suppose, through a lot of my journey has been, and I've referenced it, this sense of self-awareness, but kindness as well to myself has led me to really understand what resilience means. So a lot of people will say I embody resilience because there's been a number of different knocks, and I still get up and I'm still smiling and I'm still going, but that does not mean that I am putting on a brave face and, and just showing up because that's what the world expects me to do. I show up with a lot more vulnerability now. And when I'm talking about my cancer journey in particular, quite often I've done talks for Macmillan, for various organizations. I'm actually on the curriculum for oncology nurses at the moment in my local area, to help them understand what it means to be a patient. And nearly every time I'll cry. And I don't make an apology for that, because I appreciate that I'm still actually processing a lot of what's happened. And I allow myself that level of kindness and that understanding that this still hurts. A lot of us are going to experience things in life that still hurt. And when we think about kindness, and we have a basic human need to connect with other people, that's fundamental, especially when we're working in teams. We want to feel like we belong. We want to feel like we're adding value. We want to feel like, your voice matters, your contribution matters. And the only way we can do that is if we do offer each other that level of kindness and respect and understanding about where you're coming from with your set of strengths, with your set of skills, but to have a space in which we can show up as our full selves. And we may well have heard that in various corporate settings, bring your whole self to work. But what does that actually mean? And I think building on what Mark's just shared as well, that, we fear failure so much, which means that we don't always show up with everything that we've got to share because we're scared of getting it wrong. Whereas if we worked in an environment where people were kind, where it was just a given that your contribution matters, and actually your left field thinking is going to bring a whole load of innovation to this project or to this team or, to this dynamic, wouldn't that be amazing? And so kindness has been proven, you know, across loads of different studies, that if an organization, and definitely from the top, you know, we look to our leaders to demonstrate the way to be in an organization. And if we see our leaders demonstrating kindness by offering feedback, by offering input, by actually making time to hear somebody, to hear an idea from somebody, then that, you know, that has an impact on the culture within which we operate. And that culture has proven to demonstrate retention, you know, a lack of absenteeism. People want to show up to work every day, and innovation and creativity and collaboration all increases. And we know that there's been an impact, in particular due to, you know, COVID, lockdown, us working more remotely, that whereas before, if you'd have been in a team meeting, or if you'd have delivered a presentation to the board or to whoever, somebody probably, as you walked out the room, would have said, hey, good job, well done. That's not happening now when we have all of these meetings virtually. We haven't got the time to then give that little bit of extra feedback or that little bit of extra kindness that can make somebody then really capture the essence of what they've just done. And a big part of why I set up a business in the resilience space is because the definition of resilience that I work with is it's the meaning that we give the circumstances that we find ourselves in, but also the meaning that we give ourselves as a result of that experience or those circumstances. So knowing that someone's going to give me some feedback after I've delivered something helps me believe in me that little bit more, and it helps me show up, you know, with even more the next time, or to bring more to a new project. So there are lots of different elements to kindness, but if it is that fundamental human need that we have for connection, and we know that when we offer an act of kindness to somebody else, it actually makes us feel good. You know, it's one of the 5 ways to well-being. This sense of connection and, you know, being kind to other people makes us feel good. So for me, it's one of these traits that is a complete win-win in every single scenario. But how actively is it delivered? How actively is it demonstrated? How actively do we make it part of our everyday? And it doesn't have to obviously just be in a work context. You know, saying thank you for that cup of tea that your partner may have just made you, you know, helps build and foster that connection, you know, even in our home environment. And you know, and I know for me, kindness is very much part of one of my values, which is respect. And I really love understanding more about people and what drives them. And I think if we can take time to hear people, to listen to them, to understand them that much more and what drives them, you get so much more from that person. So I think there's a lot to it, but you know, if we can allow it to bring our whole self to work, then there is a lot more benefit. The whole business wins, you win. It makes coming to work every day a very different way of showing up, really.
Bep, thank you. As I mentioned, you're so thought-provoking, actually, in terms of it being a mirror, right? You know, I am reflecting heavily, and based on some of the things you said, I'd like to ask a question around you actually, the main point you said at the beginning was around kind of to ourselves first.
Yeah.
And then you said, then it's about showing up, right, for others. So I see a sequence which is clear to me. If we are naturally self-critical, so this is, and also maybe the imposter syndrome, there's a bit of my brain that says I've got to show up the way people expect me to show up, you know, whatever that is, you know, in control, never showing emotion, whatever that misconception is in my brain. How can we do that? How can we, how can I best describe it, become more humble, more natural, show more humility if it isn't in our current DNA? What advice would you give?
Really taking the time to recognize, and we have to change this shift in our mindset. And especially, I think this is quite demonstrative of the culture within which we might be operating anyway, either at work or at home or whatever, that we are often more critical and we want to do more or achieve more or feel like we want to, you know, give more of ourselves. But we have to really stop. And the first question is, but what have I given? What have I done well? And allowing ourselves to almost, you know, when I've done some coaching before with people, and I remember one of my clients saying to me, on her journey home every day, she takes the time in the car to think about the 3 things that she did really well today. We have to program that in a different way. Rather than thinking of all the things that we haven't achieved or things that we haven't done, we have to become very consciously able to reprogram that way of thinking, and to build on, you know, our strengths and that understanding. This self-awareness piece is really important. And I have become very particular now, and I do this a lot, is I check in with myself a good 4 or 5 times a day. You know, in the morning, what do I need? You know, is it that extra cup of coffee? Is it actually just a little bit of time out? Do I just need my brain to stop for a while before I bombard it with anything else? I'm very conscious of my morning routine, but I've had to learn all of that because I've had to extract the things that don't serve me to make space for the things that do. But that is very conscious. And the only way we can do that is if we start understanding when we're operating well and when we're not operating so well, what could we do that would help ourselves? Because nobody else is going to be able to wave that magic wand and say, hey, take the morning off or to do this. We have to be able to hear ourselves, see ourselves, and know ourselves and what our needs are and meet those needs. And we have to like ourselves. You know, like this whole self-trust builds with the only way I'm going to be the best version of myself is if I start finding all the great things about myself that I'm really passionate about sharing or understanding. So we have to bring that. I have the cheerleader and the critic in my head. My cheerleader, that volume is turned up a lot. You know, and that, you know, that doesn't mean I'm coming across as arrogant or thinking, oh my God, she's the biggest cheerleader of herself. But my critic's voice comes in when I need that extra push. But the cheerleader's voice is the one I tune into more.
Thank you. And this, I'm going to repeat it because the power is clear. Take time out to reflect, give yourself space to think and reflect, and be a cheerleader of yourself. So that where we have the doubting side of ourselves, the self-critical, the self-limiting, we don't deny it. Yeah. We just make the cheerleader speak more loudly to us and give ourselves space. The other thing you said that resonated with me was this idea of know when you are at your best and what it takes to get there, and then do that more, whether that's drink more water or sleep better, you know, the fundamental things that mean you show up in the best light is key as well. Bep, what final piece of advice would you give that it's almost like your final thought, which may be a repetition of a previous thought, to inspire us to be kinder to ourselves?
I would encourage everybody to give yourself, start small. If it's a minimum of 5 minutes a day that is just yours, please do not let anybody ever interrupt that 5 minutes. Give it to yourself, even just to sit with yourself and be with yourself and your thoughts, get to know yourself, you know, and I promise you that that time will slowly increase to 10 to 20, that becomes non-negotiable. But make sure that you factor that time in just to be with yourself.
That's brilliant. Bep's business is called Thrive 365, which I think you've articulated brilliantly, Bep. And I do encourage anyone who has resonated with Bep's message, if you need help in terms of resilience and self-belief, I can't think of anyone better than Bep. If you are with us on May the 24th, we have a face-to-face event with Uspire in London, and with luck, Bep can join us on that day, a chance to meet her in person, which would be a thrill. So Bep, I just want to say a huge thank you for your words of inspiration. They always are. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.